Alright, so as we continue through 2024 movies, this is kind of a trio that basically says, why aren't we making more stuff like this? Which I didn't intentionally do, but that just is how it played out with these three kind of coming together. So, and it's also kind of weird to say that, given that one of these is a genre that we kind of been seeing a lot lately with like the John Wick sort of one-man army style kind of movie, and one being a prequel to an iconic horror movie and horror franchise, so it might not sound like this is stuff that we want more of, but some of these are kind of examples of when you do something a certain way and execute it a certain way, it can make all the difference. So let's actually start with the horror prequel of those, which is The First Omen, which I do remember the groans and the eye rolls and all that other stuff as soon as this was announced, and it kind of sounded like just something that was going to go like straight to streaming or something. I think that's what I even assumed, or it was like that recent Pet Cemetery movie or something. It was going to be just like that, where it was just going to be on some platform or whatever, and nobody would really pay much attention to it. And then, not only was it a full theatrical release, but it came out surprisingly critically acclaimed. Like it was quite surprising how well the critics took to this. And then once you see it, even from the opening scene, really, it kind of it's already kind of falling into place as to, oh, it makes sense. This is actually something worthwhile, and something unexpected. And it's, I mean, usually I like to think that I go in open-minded anyway, but I don't know, something about this just right away where it was like, oh, this is a lot more than I was expecting just by this opening scene, I feel like. Where it starts, and I think we're in 1971, and we have this opening scene with Father Brennan from the original movie, who is Ralph Ineson now, in an amazing piece of casting, and Charles Dance, is really, I guess, just a cameo, you could say. And the way this particular scene plays out, where it feels like it might feel a little stylized in its own way, but at the same time, while kind of being stylized in its own way, it does feel like it absolutely has the tone of the original movie. Like it could be a scene right out of one of the original movies. And another great example of that particular feeling is that when you look at when these movies are sort of modernized, one thing that'll get jumped on pretty quickly is, let's make it more gory. Like, let's get more of these sort of Final Destination-esque sort of kills with the blood splatter and all that, and limbs flying off and all that. I mean, obviously, this, of all the horror franchises, this is one that is not without decapitations and stuff like that, of course. And we love the franchise for those. But the way this particular scene plays out, where it could have been like super gory and super over the top and stuff like that, and it basically feels like it goes in the opposite direction intentionally, where there's a little bit of blood, there is a fatality, but it's very downplayed for what's happening, and there's almost something that makes it even more eerie and kind of shock. Like it might not be as shocking as, say, somebody getting unexpectedly decapitated, but it's shocking in its own way, in its own downplayed way of not just what happens, but the way you see it happen is something you're not expecting, and the way it plays out. Almost like it sort of settles in, like you're kind of you have to realize what just happened and what you're looking at gradually as the scene plays out. And so that is this really eerie tone-setting thing that we start off with before we go into the actual thing. And yeah, so once we're introduced to our new main character, whose name is Margaret, if I remember correctly. It's been like a couple of weeks since I saw it, but it's what's interesting about setting it in 1971 is obviously that is 5 years prior to the original movie. But what's interesting about this is that it does feel a tad modern, but not in a way that's a fault, because when you look at the original movie, it does almost feel like, just because of where it's set and the characters that inhabit that movie, it is a movie that feels kind of older. Like it almost takes place further back than like 76. So when you see characters here, like, going out and going to clubs and stuff like that, it's like, yeah, that was something that was going on in the 70s. So this is something that would have been going on outside of what we know of the original movie. So to kind of see, I guess you could say, another side of the 70s in this setup, is something really interesting also, and to kind of see how in this particular setting is where we kind of get the beginnings of what we know, all the directions this franchise went. And so, obviously, we're going to get some some insane imagery that is probably going to be permanent as far as what's in our minds. And it's like there's a birthing scene that will stand out, to put it mildly. Basically, anything that happens in the last 15 or 20 minutes or so is gonna stick. And like in the cases where it really matters to put imagery like that to make sure it sticks, to where you're not just being bombarded with, oh, look how insane and look at all the weird shit, trying to be memorable, which is what a lot of movies fall into, especially horror movies. But here we do have these sparing moments where it's like, the movie will just be being the movie, and then you'll just get hit with this imagery you're not expecting to get hit with. Even in an Omen movie, really, even by those standards, there will be imagery that is surprising. And even in 2024 also, when we feel like we've seen just about anything, and it's like, it's getting harder for horror movies to really show us something that's like genuinely shocking, or something that really throws us off, that's like a mainstream movie. Obviously, people are doing weird shit everywhere in all kinds of movies. But as far as like, like these big mainstream theatrical releases using the title that we know and the characters that we know, there can be a kind of a safe quality sometimes that this movie does not care about, which is really refreshing. And that's why I brought it up in the beginning when I was talking about these three movies kind of feel like, oh, these are the kind of things that we should be doing. We should be doing more of, to make things more interesting and kind of throw a wrench into things that have just kind of been the same way for a while now. And it's like kind of wake audiences up a little bit. And yeah, there's some things in here that might do that. So that's really satisfying. And as far as like the creepiness factor in general, taking the place of where some modern horror audiences might, be looking for the big scares and all that, and the big moments, the way this one uses those scares is interesting, because there's one particular moment that stands out where I had a reaction to it that was essentially like a jump scare, but it was right before the actual jump scare happened, because the scene was so sort of structured to be that way, where it's we see a character crying, and then we see a nun's arm around her, and the nun is blocked off by a statue. And when we sort of peer around that statue and we see what we see, you would think that would be where the big music hits and where the audience jumps, because it's a startling image around that statue. But there's no sound. There's no the whoever's behind the scenes jumping at you so that you'll jump out of your seat. We quietly see this startling image, and then we have the moment where like somebody grabs her from behind, and that's when they put the jump noise in. And it wasn't the scene that actually makes you react to that. So it was sort of like this. And I can understand where people might say like it waters down the actual good scare to put a lame false scare milliseconds after it. But I almost kind of like that, because it is like you're kind of getting punched twice. Where it's like there's the thing that actually startles you, and before you have time to like compose yourself from that, they hit you with one of the what you were expecting. So that's something that I can appreciate. But like I can understand the criticism where it's like you only need one of them, but and I think there's an argument for it's kind of cool to have both of them too. Have the real scare and the lame scare back to back, especially when the real scare comes first. Is something that's really interesting. I know it sounds like it probably should be the other way around, where it's like, oh, here's the lame shit, but then here's the real one. But the fact that the real one here is is creepy because of how downplayed it is, because of how it's revealed to us when we're not expecting like in a way we're not expecting a reveal to happen. It can be fun to kind of switch it up a little bit. So there's that. There's obviously in general there's like the nun and the religion imagery is gonna be, especially in a particular context, it's just gonna be creepy in itself. But they like kind of lean into that a little bit, where there's this one particular nun that's really creeping a lot. Angelica, I think her name is, and like the first time we see her, she's descending the stairs, and inexplicably, like all of her robes and her veil are flailing. And it's like just the imagery like that alone. And then like I said, this character in general was kind of giving me, the actress was kind of giving me like Mia Goth vibes a little bit. And she's eventually, her sort of character arc, I guess you could say, is ultimately a callback to one of the original's most famous scenes. So this is I love these characters that like barely have just a few scenes, yet might be one of the more memorable parts of an entire movie. And I feel like this Angelica character is one of those, which is great. And it might be a little bit of a heavy-handed callback to that original scene. But in the way they sort of amp it up a little more than it was before, it might kind of seem like overkill, no pun intended, but so for the most part, I'm kind of okay with it. Like, I can kind of get where it might get a little heavy-handed, but as we were talking about with the jump scares, I wasn't really bothered by any of that in this, because everything around it is working so well that even the things that seem maybe weaker are already sort of elevated a little bit. So so the movie's working together with all of its parts to make sure everything is just a kind of full experience of the terror of what the whole big picture is. And yeah, we're talking about, religion just kind of being creepy in general. And I guess you could say it's sort of topical in its own way. Maybe not about something like specific. I mean, yeah, certainly something specifically right now that's very topical. But what I'm leaning towards when I bring that up is the idea that less and less people do seem to be kind of religious, and we're kind of moving away from that a little bit. And the fact that this is a very driving factor, like people, like in this 1971 setting, people kind of moving away from religion is a very driving force as to why what's happening here is, and the fact that and when you look at like the antagonists of the story and where the scares are really coming from, and it's like how in many cases, a lot of times what's driving people away from religion are the people that use religion as like a weapon and a power move and stuff like that. And obviously those characters will be present here also. And characters that just like, and people who do really evil things like in the name of religion and stuff like that. And so all of that is kind of driving the story that's going on here. And we were talking about other characters like Ralph Ineson playing Brennan, and there's a great I like that like when you think of Ralph Ineson, you think of a character that's probably going to be pretty intimidating, especially with his godlike voice. But I think it's interesting that he plays him much more gentle than the character was in the original movie, which makes it make more sense and kind of gives more gravitas to the character in the original movie. Because in the original movie, he just kind of seems crazed until what he's saying starts to come true. So here, it feels like it makes sense that here he kind of seems more gentle. There's urgency in him, of course, but he's much more gentle than he is. And so that I feel like that kind of shows this progression of how much the stakes have risen, how far we've gone by him being this character now when we're in the early stages of this. And then when we get to the original movie where, Damien's already 5 years old and shit's about to go down, and then he's basically gone crazed. where he's quite rational, but to everybody else he seems crazed. So I liked that sort of continuity to the character and kind of adding that to where he wasn't to the idea that he wasn't always the way he was in the original movie until things progressed the way they did is a really nice touch. Sonia Braga is also here, and I couldn't. Well, she has her own presence also, which she's shown in her career. But the one movie I kind of kept coming back to was the fact that she is the Spider Woman in Kiss of the Spider Woman, and I can't help but wonder if that casting is intentional, given that there is a bit of a spider theme in this. So so either way, coincidence or not, both of those work for me. The only, as far as casting, the only thing that kind of threw me off was, I think, the only other name that's on the poster besides the main actress whose name unfortunately is slipped my mind at the moment here, but the other name on the poster is Bill Nye, which is interesting because he has a very crucial role, obviously, but I also kind of kept forgetting he was in it. But when he does come back, it's usually for a very crucial purpose in the story, so there's that. Maybe just a tiny bit more of him would have worked, and also maybe some... I'm not saying you have to really go all in on the being a prequel thing, but more, more presence of the religious figures in the original movie in this particular setting, I feel like could have kind of helped tie things together a little more also. But, because they do take liberties with the continuity, getting this one from here to the original movie. There's a lot of great ways, like we were talking about with the Brennan character, but also, just in general, the way the movie ends and how it does kind of flow right into the intent is to flow right into the original movie. And it's like that in general. There's one particular detail there, right at the end there, that's satisfying as far as feeling like it goes right from this to that. But yeah, there's when you look at the really sort of finite details, you can see there were liberties taken with the continuity, and it's yeah, I guess I don't want to be the person that gets too bent out of shape about that, but at the same time, it would be more satisfying if there were much more if the connections were much more specific, and those weren't just kind of there's some cases where you kind of have to assume, oh, I guess for that to mean this in the original movie, that would mean this, but there's no real, it doesn't feel solidified. It kind of feels like you kind of have to reach for it a little bit. There's some of that as far as tying the movies together, but it still feels satisfying enough going from this one to that one. But still, the main thing here is just what you want out of a horror movie, the general atmosphere and the vibe of it. There's this sequence where a nun takes her vows, and it's that imagery I was talking about that just kind of burns itself in your mind. I think there was a teaser poster, the first teaser poster or something, was an image from this sequence, and that's just, like I said, memorable imagery goes a very long way in horror. To where even if you saw it out of context, it would just run some sort of shiver through you, and that's got plenty of this also. Because as far as the story itself, this, like many horror movies, have this sort of investigative aspect to it, where it's the characters trying to put everything together. The original movie was obviously a lot of this, but that's where we come into the problem of it being a prequel and the fact that we do know the directions that it goes. And while it does have its own sort of twists and turns on that to kind of keep it from completely being the whole, oh, we know exactly what's going to happen from here, it's nothing really mind-blowingly surprising or anything like that. At the end of the day, we know where we have to get to and how we're going to get there. And so that's something that kind of, for being something that spends a lot of time on the investigating aspect of what could this be, what could this mean, what are we leading to, that's something where it's it's kind of a fault. It's a setback for a prequel. So I commend them for trying to kind of throw in their own twists here and there in between getting from point A to point B, but it's still it drags a little bit when you kind of know what the investigation is leading to. So that's something that I feel like maybe could have been cut down a little bit, because the movie is 2 hours, which feels kind of long for this. But once it gets to that last 20 minutes or so, and quite literally all hell breaks loose, then that's really satisfying. So, and you kind of feel like you get what you came here for, so that's great. So I can totally see the acclaim for this, and I'll be curious to kind of watch like all of them together at some point when this one is like physical. So unless they pull a Barbarian on it, but we won't go down that road. So let's now go into Monkey Man, the movie that has a lot of things behind it that I only learned after the fact, after I saw it. Like the whole thing about how it was originally going to be like a Netflix movie, and then like Netflix like kind of almost dropped it maybe, to where it might not have been seen by anybody. And then Jordan Peele kind of swooped in and put his Monkey Paw logo on it, and then it got this big release, and now it's this. It kind of felt like one of those sort of event things they were building up when it was actually coming out. It was very well marketed. So going on that, there's that. There's also the other thing of apparently this is a pretty political movie in regards to like India and stuff like that. I know nothing about that, so if that's the kind of thing you wanted to hear about when you come to a video like this, I've got nothing on that. I only know this as an action movie. So, and the other things that the movie has going on. So I don't know the layers beyond that. So I don't know how valuable this is going to be to you, but looking at it as not just as an action movie, but the fact that this is the directorial debut of Dev Patel, who's already worked with a pretty impressive lineup of directors. With obviously there's Boyle, there's David Lowery, there's Ian Itchie. He did the David Garfield movie with. Even Garth Davis with Lion was there's so he's worked with so many of these directors that like have these visions, have this very visionary way about them. And so to kind of take what you feel like is like everything he's learned, and not just from the people he's worked with, but from like the genres that he knows, and bringing it does feel like there's so much sort of packed into this one movie that might otherwise just be this sort of revenge action movie. There is, as far as like starting off as an action movie immediately, where we've talked about we're kind of in this age, like we're post the Raid, we're post John Wick, where it's like it feels like we've kind of seen every possible fight scene, every possible kind of choreography and all that, and like these one-man army movies, and it's like it kind of all feels like it's been done. But then it does seem like every now and then there is one that kind of comes in, and it's like, oh no, there's still more ways you can do this. There's still cool things you can do with this. It's surprising how much you can do with a sort of subgenre that seems so simple. But this one has stuff up its sleeve, visually and otherwise. And it's because like even when you have like there's one particular reason the main character wants to kill this particular person, and he's going to have to go through all of these people to get to that one moment of revenge. And there might be one more layer of it where it's like there's the person you really want revenge on, and then there's going to be like at least one more layer that you're going to have to deal with in order to do that afterwards. It's a layout we've seen so many times before, but there's something about the way this one is made that does feel very much like its own thing. Where it is sort of like, I can almost imagine it being a bit of a headache by the way it is, where like it is very, very flashy. Like it's super flashy, but it's so alive, and it feels so chaotic, but it feels and very much it's to the credit of Patel and like the editors and stuff like that, and I guess the cinematographer too. It feels super chaotic, but it feels like controlled chaos. Like it feels like the movie's always on the verge of getting completely out of control and going way off the rails, but just as it's about to, they find a way to sort of rein it back in to where you get that rush of being like right on the edge of, oh, this is about to go away. This is about to go in a place it maybe shouldn't. But then it always brings itself back just enough and doesn't get too messy. Which it's like there's a big difference between chaotic and messy. One can be really great, one almost never is. And so when you have that sort of control, then you can find something really special and really fun. And like I said, something that's you don't see very often because it's something that very few people can actually reach and do successfully, because it's something that can be really easy to fail at, where you go in too much or it's too chaotic, it's too, all chopped up. There's the opening scene when he goes into the ring and he has the first fight scene, and it's like you can tell right away there, like it's almost like what the first fight scene looks like is almost always going to give you the vibe of this is going to be really great, this is going to be some amazing action, or it's going to be like, oh, we're doing this, great. And more often than not always, but more often than not, you can pinpoint where you're going to go with the opening scene. And so, sure enough, with this opening fight scene, we're nice and up close to the action, but we're not too close, and we're just close enough to where every hit and every beating you can feel, and you can feel bones breaking, and you can feel the pain that the characters are in. And that's the kind of thing that I feel like we may not get enough of in movies like this, where it's like guys just kind of get thrown to the side and, knocked out of the frame and all that. And there's a lot of, assumed death. But here it's like practically every character, whenever a hit happens, you can feel the pain and the breakage in that character. And it's like even if they're just like an extra, like if they're just some random stunt person or something, you feel like all of the violence, and you can feel also that was kind of a big point to the movie in general, that every bit of violence is felt, especially when you look at it from the revenge angle, and it's not just the anger that this character's coming from, but the sort of having to get to one act of violence you want to commit by committing several. Even several feels like a small word in comparison to what he's going to have to go through violence-wise to get to just the one act of violence is the goal. And so it does feel, and also talking about the sort of flashiness of it, when we get these little objectives that kind of get us, because he has so much of a maze of power he has to go through, something really exciting about this movie is also that step-by-step process of, well, to get to this sort of faraway goal, he's going to have to do this little task and get past this person and then this and then that, and it's just stepping stones and a process, a very patient process for this character as he sort of integrates himself into this, and then can sort of build his way to getting into enough of a position to achieve what he wants to achieve. And so we get moments like there's a stolen wallet that is used to basically set this off, and the way that whole sequence plays out, and then we kind of put together what the purpose of this stolen wallet is and how it plays into his goals. Stuff like that is just really enthralling right away, and can pull you into just about any story. And it's once he has you pulled in, it's you'll pretty much go anywhere with him, wherever it may be, for whatever purpose. And that's a really great feeling to have as somebody watching a movie, is to feel like that. The storyteller cares enough about you as the audience to pull you along. And that's what a sequence like that, especially as early in the movie as it is, feels like. To where it's not like, hey, I'm just going to do this thing, I hope you can keep up. It almost feels like we're participating in a way in the way we're watching it play out. Which is fantastic and can really all consume you as far as story and the atmosphere and everything about this. There is the soundtrack choices even are very those are cases where it's another risky thing, where it's that could be something that's really oh, I didn't see that coming, and then you're like you feel like you're on the outside again. But there's a use here of Roxanne and a use of Somebody to Love that is somehow unexpected yet very welcome. And so, where it's like, in particular, it's like when he's in like a club and the music is sort of drowned out, and you can only hear the lyrics. And it's like that felt really interesting and unique because kind of usually it's the other way around, where it's like they'll use an instrumental, but it went the other direction, and it's at first it can be sort of like, what the fuck is happening now? But just the style of it is something where it's established so early on and so well. You're just gonna basically, if you're with it, you're gonna be with it, and you'll take whatever whatever happens next, whether it be story wise or stylistically, which is great. There's even a comedic moment out of nowhere where it kind of seems like he's gonna have his a particular Jason Bourne moment, and it is unsuccessful. And this is in a particular moment where the stakes are pretty high. He's very, very far into a fight with several people when this sudden comedic bit happens, and it's kind of fantastic because it's as far as you can praise it for being a sort of realistic moment for sure. But even sometimes those can be sort of off-putting. Like there was a time there where we were reaching moments where movies were getting so fantastical that people were really starting to praise like individual realistic moments. Like if a gun goes off and you feel like you're deaf or something like that, or somebody fighting actually starts to get physically tired and can barely fight anymore, stuff like that. That's the stuff we started really leaning towards and praising more. And sometimes there's moments where it's like, if you're going to be fantastical, be fantastical. Where it's like having, a real moment amidst a fantastical fight can take you out of it just as much as having a realistic fight that suddenly has a fantastical moment in it. But there's something about this here to where it feels somehow, because of like the sort of mythology that it's like coming from or whatever, like he's becoming like this mythological figure in a way. There's this whole thing of there's already this sort of fantastical element that's in a story that's pretty grounded. So there's already kind of a mixture of the two going on. So just those little realities kicking in during these, big fight scenes. And like I was talking about with the sound, with like the bones breaking and stuff like that, where you can feel the fights. Like that coexisting with a fantastical element is something the movie is doing throughout. And so that's something that I can really appreciate. Though we do get to a moment kind of in the middle here where it reaches this moment where it almost seems to slow down and take a break, where he kind of has to come back. And so where he falls and then has to come back. And so we get some really trippy sequences here also, and we get some great sequences like when he's when he's trying to loosen himself up to be able to punch again because he got that fucked up. There's a person with a drum nearby that's like timing their drumming with him punching, and this is how he kind of trains himself back, or starts to train himself back. And there's great sequences like that, but it also does kind of feel like there's kind of a pacing issue once we get to this part, where it did feel like we were kind of really rolling along, and how the whole thing was going to kind of roll from the momentum that it had right into its climax. But here, it does make sense. We do have this moment where he falls and has to get back up. And so now that I know that's the structure of the movie, if I were to see it again, I probably wouldn't necessarily have that problem with its pacing this time, because I know the structure now, and the arc of the character. So that's something. I do think there might be one too many flashbacks. That might not be helping either, but like I was saying, now that I know the structure of the movie, I'd be curious to see how I feel about that if or when I see it again. So, but yeah, and then of course we get to our big climax where everything we've kind of been building to gets paid off in a really big way. So that's and that delivers on everything. So and shows that this is definitely something. I'm not sure if Dev Patel as a director and a writer is interested in like solely action or if he's gonna do like all kinds of things. But this definitely feels like the beginnings of an action director for sure. And it's like once he kind of gets more comfortable with that job, what else he's going to be capable of is going to be really exciting. So that's and if he continues to take the roles, also more Dev Patel acting too is something that I greatly look forward to. So because we just talked about how I felt like he was the MVP of the Henry Sugar short that Wes Anderson did. And so I'm just a Dev Patel fan in general, but him having multiple jobs per movie now is something very exciting. So let's go on to Problemista, which we're going to end on, which also involves the writer and director being the lead character in the movie. And this is Julio Torres, who I felt like I wasn't that familiar with. And then looking up his credits, I saw that he was a writer on Saturday Night Live, which kind of makes sense. And he was a writer on the Chris Gethard show, which makes perfect sense. Because if you weren't aware of the Chris Gethard show, which was just like a couple of seasons, which I think is like all on YouTube, as soon as I saw that, not familiar with any of his other work, which apparently also quite aligns with this, my immediate thought was, oh, if he was a writer for Chris Gethard, then this is going to be funny, but also really surreal and really original. Like, it's not going to be like anything hardly anybody has seen before. This is going to be coming from a really sort of interesting place that is untreaded territory, and yeah, that's the vibe. Like, as far as it being a story in general about a guy just really wanting to achieve his dreams and having obstacles along the way, and meeting eccentric characters along the way, that's, of course, something that sounds familiar, but this is also something where you can do anything with that, and Torres, as a writer, director, and actor, is going to do that. He was just, when this was coming out, he got to go to the Criterion Closet, and a couple of things he picked were After Hours was in there, and he talked about Where's the Friend's House from the Coker trilogy, and how he really related to that main character. And it's like, when you take into account all of this stuff, like the credits he already has and his influences, this movie is somehow always surprising, but also exactly what you want it to be. So he's really accomplished something with this movie. And there's something very special about this movie, kind of personally. Like, not even just, as the kind of movie that we don't really see much at all or not much of, and the creativity as far as, yes, we've seen a character visualize his mind before, where it's like not like fantasy sequences necessarily, but just these sort of things that show you visually how the character feels inside his own mind. I would say without, the character having to narrate, but the thing is that this movie has a narrator with Isabella Rossellini, but it's not narration from the perspective of the main character, whose mind we are often inside. There's a lot going on here, and it might sound like too much. But it's not. This is another one where if you're on board with it, it's just right, and it's just exactly what you want it to be. And even his performance as this character, who is basically, I mean, you could say he's just this sort of blank slate that's surrounded by all these people, but there's a difference between being a blank slate and somebody who's just like the perfect contrast to chaos, which is who this person is. Like, he has this way of, his line deliveries are perfect. There's one in particular that comes up continuously, where he says, "Oh no," a lot. And, like, when you hear that in that tone, it sounds insincere, it sounds sarcastic. But watching this character, that's the way he talks, but this character is incapable of insincerity. Like, this character can only be sincere, which is amazing. And it's like, that's another thing where it's like, I've heard criticisms like that, not just from in other reviews, but in like criticisms of my own writing, where it's like the main character has to be, you know, this certain thing or whatever. Like, the main character has to be like the star of the show, so it has to be, they can't just be somebody that everything else is bouncing off of. But it's like, no, there is a way to do. It's very, very difficult, but there is a way to do that where it's like there's something almost like, obviously the character speaks quite a bit, but there's almost something, he has a quality to him of like silent film stars in a way. Like, I kind of go back to if you want to talk about movies that were critically bashed, Charlie Day's movie Fool's Paradise that just came out last year. That his character in that, I kind of feel like is this character that Torres plays in this movie is kind of what that character was intended to be, but with an actual silent aspect, and where it's like, and I do understand where it's like, you don't want a main character that's overpowered by all the big personalities surrounding them, but there's just the perfect notes that he finds here in his own performance, is somehow makes him stand out to where he does feel like the character of the movie. There's no denying he is the character of the movie, even with his co-lead being Tilda Swinton giving the performance that she's giving. Because if you want to talk about how this main character is a contrast to the people around him, this isn't just a Tilda Swinton character. This is Tilda Swinton constantly at a 10. Really, she's constantly at 100. And there's like, even when there's like a break or two that kind of humanizes her a little bit, and we kind of get to see another side of her, it still feels like she is a constantly amplified personality. And the way she's able to handle that, also, because she's Tilda Swinton, obviously, but how when you look at a character like this, it would have been very easy for this character to be insufferable. And if a character like this, who's in the movie for as much as she is, like I said, she's basically a co-lead to Torres, but to have a character like this as like a co-lead and be this insufferable would make the movie insufferable, is what typically might happen. Yet, because of the dynamic between the two of them, and because you have Alejandro, his character, to kind of be the contrast to her, how over the top she is and how insufferable she is ends up being like one of the movie's big assets. And it's like, where there's an inner, like, you hate her, and you hate, you know, you hate her for the people that she interacts with, whether it be that poor waiter or any employee that she has to deal with, or has to deal with her. Is like, you feel sympathetic for everybody around her that has to deal with her, but there's still always something about her that's entertaining. Like, when, you know, she walks into this place, like this coffee shop or whatever, and she sits down, and there's like maybe 2 seconds between her sitting down and the waiter coming to the table. And when he gets there, she says she's been waiting forever, and she asks, like, are you closed? Like, how did it take you so long to get here? And the thing about it is, there's something funny about that. Like, you feel bad for the waiter, sure, but there's something funny about that because Tilda Swinton's character firmly believes, without a shadow of a doubt, that the 2 seconds she was sitting there was an eternity. Like, it's... like, she really, truly believes that stuff like that are, like, basically the worst things to happen to her in the moment. Because that's where the title really comes from, is this character is just nothing but problems, and sees everything as nothing but a problem. And she, admittedly, does have very big problems that could make her pretty erratic. But all of the tiny problems, all the easily solvable problems, all the things that aren't even problems necessarily at all, are just as big to her as the actual real problems that she has. They're all kind of at the same level of stakes. And so that's something that's really interesting. This character that thinks that FileMaker Pro is like is like the gold standard of files on a computer, and the fact that Alejandro doesn't even know how to use this, nor does probably anybody. But yet it's this very important factor in her entire life, where everything is amplified. They basically play her up as like social anxiety's worst enemy. Like when we people that have social anxiety and we don't want to go out and we don't want to deal with the world, these are the people. This is what we're afraid of running into. This is what we're afraid is out there. Where you get just any minor problem for somebody else is going to be a big problem for you because this person is such, we'll say, a massive personality, to be nice to her, to try to understand her a little bit. But yeah, but then, like I said, we have a character like Alejandro who's dealing with her. So, and this is a character that is so sort of in his mind in a very big way. Like, he's very aware of what's going on outside. Like, he's not somebody that's, like, trapped in his mind, necessarily. But his mind is very... His imagination is very vast, and his creativity is very vast. So anything is going to become this creative scenario visualized in his head. Whether it be this... that there's this spirit of sorts, I guess you could call him, that is Craigslist in his mind. There's a very funny yet totally annoyingly relatable interaction with a bank employee. There is as far as like visualizing, also not even necessarily just interactions, but also this sort of ticking clock. Like there's the room of hourglasses for immigrants that are running out of time before they're deported. It is a whole obstacle in itself and a whole way to raise the stakes in itself. But there's also this visualization of, I'm not even sure how to explain it. And for a movie like this that feels so small, to have visuals that are so big that I have trouble explaining them is very, very impressive. But it's like, I guess you could call it like a layered room maze of sorts. I have no idea how these shots were accomplished. But yeah, when you see that, and like I said, we were talking about this recently with All of Us Strangers, where it's like a movie this small and with a budget like this, and coming from such a small place, it's really interesting that we have filmmakers that can make you say, how did they do that with barely any budget at all? And for a story that's not even necessarily like big, like this is just a very human person going through very human moments and human obstacles. Like we were talking about the fact that he's basically just trying to accomplish his dreams. But we've got stuff like, there's the immigration obstacle, there's trying to, get this reference from Tilda Swinton, who is who she is, and just these characters that pop in and out of his life. Like, you can really see like the After Hours sort of inspiration or influence of these characters that just kind of come in and out and leave their very big personalities behind. And to my understanding, there's quite a bit of this that kind of comes from his real life also. So there is something very real. But as far as it being sort of universal, like those things that come from his real life are things that there are many people, unfortunately, that can relate to. But as far as like these little moments that are even more universal are something that I really feel like makes this movie particularly special, where it's like when these things just constantly happen that prevent you from doing what you know you were put on this earth to do. There's even like a moment, there's a whole obstacle in the third act, as we're kind of getting into the third act, involving a Cabbage Patch doll. And it's something that I kind of went through quite recently, and there was something kind of cathartic about seeing Alejandro deal with it. And it's... I don't... Yeah. And because this... I think it's also one of those things where not to get too into this, but I feel like that I'm in that place that Alejandro's in for most of the movie, but it's this movie just happened to come to me when I've been feeling particularly hopeless about what we're essentially talking about with these, dreams that should be achievable, but it's just like obstacle after obstacle, and it's like the world is doing everything it can to prevent you from getting there. And so, at the time, at the mood I'm at, where I came across this movie is kind of giving it another layer to me, really. So it's like I guess you could say it's a movie I needed or something, and it just happened to. Oh, Julio Torres just said, "Here it is. This is basically what you're feeling." Now, mind you, he has more obstacles, but it's this very relatable thing where it's like you just can't reach those things, and there's always something, and the unpredictability of life and its people and its types of people. It's very different types of people, and it's. I think you get what I'm saying. It's just the thing I keep coming back to is it feels like a very special movie. It's personal for him, but also universal for all of us that have this creativity that we're just desperately trying to get out there. That we almost feel like needs to be out there because what else are we going to do if it's not? Like, what are we? This like, what are we worth if we don't get that creativity out there? And people like us, like, we don't really have anything else to put out there. That's it. So if we can't do that, it's a very scary feeling. And I feel like this movie really portrays that in a really cool and unique and original, surreal, funny way. There's so I really love this movie, and I'm really glad that he made it, and I'm definitely going to keep track of him and his work. And go back to his other work also. So all of this is very exciting. What we've been talking about. Like I said, all of this is stuff that we should be doing creatively in movies. So it's nice that these are out here and getting made and getting seen, and getting the acclaim that they deserve. So that's I think where I want to leave this one. So I think I know what at least the next couple of reviews are going to be. Obviously, we're going to do the Speaking Bluntly thing for The Fall Guy, and again for If. So what is that, next month? At the end of next month, I think, and The Fall Guy is obviously this coming weekend. So actually, The Fall Guy is probably out by the time this video goes out. But yeah, so we're gonna keep doing this 2024 thing and see what else happens. So until then, I think that's it.